Hello and welcome to The Print. Former US president has won the race for the White House in one of the greatest political comebacks in American history by defeating his Democratic rival, Kamala Harris, in an election that virtually divided the country into two camps. So in a way, Donald Trump is back. We have with us Shashi Tharoor, senior Congress leader, Lok Sabha MP, and former Minister of State for External Affairs to explain to us what does it mean for India as well as the world. Well, there is definitely a lot of which is at stake for India. How is India going to be impacted?
Look, it's difficult to say, but in one sense it's easy to say because this is somebody we've had 4 years of prior experience with. He was president after all, and the gentleman is an open book. He speaks his mind, he speaks volubly and often and in detail. So it's difficult to say that there'll be too many surprises. In fact, I would tend to think that this is not likely to be a period that should give us very many surprises. From Narendra Modi's point of view, there's been a good equation with Mr. Trump in the past. The two of them have actually had a fairly decent chemistry. Each one, I think Trump said, "Ab ki baar Modi Sarkar" first, and Modi said, "Ab ki baar Trump Sarkar." And now that's turned out to be true. It wasn't true when he said it 4 years ago. It is now. You saw Mr. Modi's very generous tweets of support and endorsement with a picture of them hugging each other. So with all of this stuff, I think there's an expectation in Delhi that at least the personal vibes should be pretty good between the two of them. Now, in terms of specific issues, I think it's pretty clear that Mr. Trump is a transactional leader. This is somebody who's not going to give you something without asking for something back. What are you going to give me? Then I'll see what I can give you. Is going to be an issue, particularly when it comes to trade relations, because he's already spoken very negatively about India's tariffs and India's ability to take what he considers a negative line on trade issues. And he said very clearly that if there's going to be tariffs from India on American goods, there'll be tariffs in America on Indian goods. That may hurt us more than it hurts them, because to be honest, American goods are already expensive when they get here. The tariffs only make them more expensive, whereas Indian goods sell because they're cheaper. And if tariffs drive them up to world prices, then I think that the sales of our exports to America could be affected. So we have to do something fairly substantial about that. The other issue that I'm concerned about, though there's no clarity on it fully, is the question of immigration. He ran a campaign that was very strongly negative on immigration. And as a result, there is a concern that the whole message about immigration, which is about illegal immigrants, could also spill over into the legal immigrants whom we supply to America, techies and other professionals, because these folks have been applying for large numbers of H-1B visas, and I think there is a risk that their numbers might be restricted. There is a risk that they might take longer to get the visas, and there's also further risk that from a human point of view, the family reunion process of getting your families over from India when you've got a visa like that in America, that may be held up, delayed, or even perhaps seriously affected. So all of these immigration questions, I think, do raise a question mark in people's minds. On the foreign policy front, tough line on China. We expect that from Trump. We've seen it before. Last time he practically conducted a trade war on China. So again, I would expect that is something that India can be reasonably content with, because if China is facing hostility from the US side, they may be more inclined to try not to open up another flank with us. They may be quite anxious to try and keep us on side, as it were. So I would say that a lot of this is based on previous experience. We still have 2.5 months to go, because though the president is elected on the 5th of November, 5th or 6th of November, he actually takes office only on the 20th of January. Right. And between now and then, you're going to see what kind of policy positions are articulated, who are the principal advisors who hover around him, who's going to be in his cabinet. All of these things will give you further clues as to the kinds of policies that he is going to come up with.
Well, you've touched upon a lot of subjects, but I just wanted you to speak a little more about, the fact that Indians were closely watching this US election because many felt it could have significant impacts on key areas such as trade and the stock market. So what does it mean in terms of long-term, impact as far as India is concerned on trade as well as the stock market?
Well, I think trade, definitely there is the issue that I've already mentioned. The truth is that some of the details we really do have to wait and see, right? I mean, it's extremely I mean, we would be jumping the gun when we've not actually seen any particular detailed articulation of policy intentions. Some of that will come in the next couple of months because Trump is, probably anxious to hit the ground running. He may well indicate very specific measures that he's going to take. During the campaign, he said a lot of very inflammatory things. He wants to throw Muslims out of his country. He wants to bar certain countries from having access. He's going to turf out every illegal immigrant who's waiting. There are lots of things happening. In practice, how do you go about that, and what specific measures are you announcing you're going to do? I think we ought to give him a little while for his victory to sink in and see what he comes up with.
Well, as you also mentioned, Trump has, said that he will not only cut down on illegal, but legal immigration also. So what does it mean for India and the H-1B visa application? Because that is one fear that...
We don't know, Neelam. We know that it's something we have to think about, worry about, and be prepared for. But until a specific policy initiative is announced, all we can do is speculate, and there's not much point in going farther than I already did.
And also, Trump has in the past branded India as a big trade abuser. You also pointed it out. Again, there is a fear that he will impose higher tariffs on more than $75 billion worth of Indian exports to the US. How do you see that panning out?
Well, that's a question that, again, remains to be seen over the next couple of years. I mean, over the next couple of months, because the thing with Trump is he says a lot, some of which he actually acts on. You remember in the previous administration, when he talked about building this wall, no one took it seriously, but he actually did build a wall on the Mexican border. It wasn't much of a wall. Some of it was just a fence. Some of it was fairly easily breached. But nonetheless, the point is the gentleman does do things that you don't particularly expect people to actually go ahead and do. So my gut feeling is we will see soon enough what noises are coming out of the so-called transition team that Trump will appoint very soon. He'll appoint somebody to head his transition team. That person would be a very influential voice, could become a future chief of staff in the White House. You're going to see some of the key players who will be around Trump emerging. Will Pompeo come again as a possible Secretary of State? Will there be a new person? Who's going to be his trade czar? We're hearing Elon Musk's name as somebody who's likely to be a principal advisor during this phase. I mean, Elon Musk is too busy with his own companies to actually become a cabinet member, but he can certainly head some sort of commission or be an advisor. And he has some fairly exotic ideas. So there's a lot that's out there, and I don't want to sit here picking sort of straws out of thin air. But we should be prepared for some of these things. Still, broadly speaking, as I said, we don't need to feel too surprised because we've seen a great deal of Donald Trump when he was president, and we can't expect him to be very different the next time around.
Well, in the context of this win, what do you feel or think about the rise of the right?
It's quite significant. In fact, it's more than quite significant because a lot of people assumed that there was a sort of a hidden, silent vote for Harris that was going to manifest itself because a lot of people were intimidated by the sort of vehemence of the MAGA crowd. MAGA is Make America Great Again. And that, therefore, they were keeping quiet, but they would vote for Harris. In fact, they didn't. And of the 7 contested battleground states, 6 of them went to Trump. And I'm afraid all Harris got was a relatively small and inconsequential Nebraska. So we're looking at a moment in American history that certainly a lot of the democratic, liberal, left of center friends are very shaken by, were not totally prepared for, and are feeling pretty bad about. It's also, I'm afraid, and I'm sorry to say this to a woman, it's also a sign of how difficult it is for a woman of color to rise to the highest office in the land. Hillary Clinton already found out that just being a woman was a major handicap. She was by far the more qualified candidate when Trump won in 2016. And many people said it was a gender issue. People didn't want to vote for a woman in the highest office. Now, here we had a woman candidate who was also a woman of color, half Indian, half black, half Jamaican. And that clearly was, for many people, a stretch too far. And that's something that when you think of America as a very liberal, progressive, even woke sort of place, it looks like a backlash against that kind of progressive wokeness that some of us associate with the atmosphere on American campuses and American elite and American publications, but which may clearly not be there in the general American mainstream, and against which there might even be a backlash.
But what about this rise of the right, overall? I mean, apart from the US elections, how do you see that?
Well, overall, the rise of the right is not a new phenomenon. It began about 10 years ago with a backlash against globalization to begin with, because we actually saw people saying, in the working class in countries like America, but also in other Western countries, saying, why should we vote for elites who are sending our jobs off to Shanghai or Bangalore? And there was a backlash against globalization. Along with that, there was a cultural backlash against foreigners, migration, especially immigrants into these countries. Even the Brexit vote was a reflection of that. So for the last decade or even a dozen years, we are seeing this rise of the right. Some of it, there's been a pushback. So though the right rose in a country like France, in a country like Germany, it never reached power. It came second, sometimes a close second, didn't quite make power. It's something which people have been watching, but people feel can still be contained. Trump's comeback, I think, will surprise a lot of those who thought that the phenomenon of the rise of the right can pretty much, be slowly written off as a phenomenon of one period, say about a decade or a dozen years, and then disappearing. The message is it's not disappeared. And in some cases, as in Trump, as in Modi, as in Erdogan in Turkey, it seems to have a certain durability, a certain durable appeal, which the liberal side would be very unwise to discount.
The Vishwa Hindu Parishad, which is an affiliate of the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, it has come out with a statement saying that with Trump at the helm of affairs in the US, Hindus will be much safer across the world.
Well, there's certainly been some of that talk even during the campaign. A lot of people felt well disposed towards Trump. In fact, the indications are that a significant number of Indian males, and particularly Hindu males in America, voted for Trump, rather than, as one might have expected initially, for the half Indian candidate. They didn't do that. And that suggests to me that what you're saying about the VHP message is not totally surprising. Mr. Modi's message, too, was very quick. I think he was one of the first world leaders to greet Trump, even before it became 100% clear that Trump was winning. They jumped the gun. They had a picture of Mr. Modi hugging Mr. Trump and talking about my dear friend Trump. So there's definitely a sense of affinity, shall we say, between the Hindutva movement and the right of the cultural right in India and the cultural and economic right in America. Let's see how that pans out. If they are right, then it'll be good for this government in India and its supporters, and that is something that perhaps people can feel happy about.
Well, in a way, it was a Tamil candidate versus a Telugu candidate.
Well, we do have, of course, you're right, we have a second lady, not half. Yes. She's fully Indian, but yes. A second lady in the vice presidential mansion. Her husband is a proverbial heartbeat away from the presidency. And yes. She's certainly, so one way or the other, we do have some Desi connection to the powers, whichever one had won. And now this is the one we've got.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of chatter on social media with, memes being shared about PM Modi and Trump's friendship. We saw this, Trump clad in a saffron kurta. How do you see all of that? In a way, a celebration of sort.
Yeah, well, those memes, I think, artificial intelligence generated. I'm more interested in the real intelligence of people.
But many BJP leaders are sharing it.
Yeah. I know. Look, I mean, I don't want to make this into a domestic political quarrel. I think the Congress party president, Mallikarjun Kharge, has also issued a message of congratulations. As Indians, we have to work with whoever the American people elect. And I will make a point that I should have made earlier, Neelam, which is that the underlying fundamentals of the relationship between India and the US do transcend politics on both sides. It almost doesn't matter whether it's Republicans or Democrats there. It almost doesn't matter if it's BJP or Congress here. Both sides are committed to the relationship. It's partially because there are very key core interests, including geostrategic interests and economic interests. There are no fundamental differences or clashes between the two countries. And there is the heavy presence of the 4 million strong Indian diaspora in America, which is a force for closer relations between the two countries. That will have persisted whoever had won. So I do want to say that I don't think this is something where I need to say something against the welcome to Trump, because in the end, if we had been in power, we would have welcomed it too.
Well, you talked about Trump being a transactional leader. There's another fear that he's a mercurial leader. So, how will that pan out?
Well, by definition, if somebody is mercurial, we have no idea how it's going to pan out. What some he might seize it, and what he might suddenly say or do. We'll just have to wait and see. And I think on some of these things, Neelam, wait and watch is really not a bad message, particularly when the official announcement hasn't yet come. And the
Yes.
swearing in is 2.5 months away. Let's give it that much time to see what kind of signals come our way from the next 2.5 months of the so-called transition.
Well, just last two questions. The Indian American diaspora is a significant and wealthy population. What do you see as their role in US politics?
I think it's extremely influential. They're by far the most prosperous segment of any ethnic group in America. They have the highest per capita income. They also are people with education, with influence. They're willing to spend their money on politicians. They actually are very prominent in fundraising and so on. And on top of that, they are people who are willing to get into politics. In fact, out of proportion with the strength in the population, they have produced governors, they've produced couple of presidential candidates, in fact 3. They have now produced a second lady. They've had a UN ambassador. They've had significant. They've had senators. They've had governors. They've had congressmen, women. So the Indian Americans are a force to be reckoned with, out of proportion to their numbers in the population, and therefore I would say that I think this is an important group. And most American politicians will not ignore them or will not feel they can afford to be indifferent to them. So this is, in many ways, an asset for India too, because if these folks start saying, this is what we want, we'd like you to take this position on India, whatever, most American administrations would listen.
My last question, is there a lesson to be learned for Indian politics, for the Congress in an election where issues like wokeism were debated?
Well, I mean, obviously in America, there was a backlash to it. In India, I don't think it's quite as widespread an issue. I don't think that people are going to be voting on whether somebody's woke. And I'm not sure we have the same degree of wokeness here. Ours is fundamentally a more conservative society, and all these quarrels about gender and about people self-identifying what gender they have and having sex change operations before they're old enough to vote. And all of these issues that are being debated in America are not really issues here in India. We haven't got to that stage yet. So I don't think we should draw facile lessons from any one country to any other country, least of all when it concerns us.
Well, thank you so much for giving us your time. I know you have to rush, but thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.